Depending on who you ask, the worst Arkham game will either be Arkham Knight, because of the tank, or Arkham Origins due to its lack of identity. But there's another game. Arkham Origins Blackgate. Just one look at the Steam reviews makes it clear, this game is not really liked by those that played it. And that includes me. I played this game, and I regret it, but at least it can serve as a bad example. I think it's very fitting that the version I played was released on April 1st, because this game is a joke. Arkham Origins was criticized for doing the same thing as the other games before it, just slightly worse in some aspects. Arkham Origins Blackgate, however, does a lot of things different, while still keeping most recognizable aspects like the combat, gadgets, and detective mode. What makes it so bad is the execution. Things like the graphics can obviously be attributed to the fact that it was originally a 3DS game, but what I'm talking about mainly is the gameplay mechanics and how it is executed in what it tries to be. Now, if you like this game, either the original on the 3DS or this version, I'm not saying you're wrong for liking it, or that your experience is invalid. I'm just looking at why this game seems to fail at being great for so many people. Let's just hop into the game, and before we even start, we get a bad impression. Look at this cover image. What is this? Take any random game and you see good cover images. Now look at this. Damn. Bad start. Anyways, we begin the game with a cinematic, not rendered in 3D, but in the storyboard style. I think it's fine to use this style, but later on the cutscenes become less polished, which, in this style, is really noticeable. Catwoman steals something, these people aren't happy about it, they fight Batman, and we transition into gameplay. The first gameplay mechanic we are introduced to is combat, but you might notice that it is in 2D. Well, the description says it's 2.5D, but effectively the game plays in 2D. There's nothing wrong with 2D or 2.5D games, but if you do them like this, there is something wrong with that. The combat is simultaneously too easy and too difficult. That may sound contradictory, but later on you'll see exactly what I mean. Like all the other Arkham games, you can punch and counter, but unlike the other games, you only have two directions for enemies to attack you from. This simplifies the combat, which was on the other games already criticized for being simplistic, even more. The reason you lock onto enemies in games like Arkham Asylum, City and Night is because you have 360 degrees in a 3D environment, which makes, for example, judging distances more difficult. Weird as this comparison might sound, the 3D Sonic games actually do something similar. There you also have a lock-on, because navigating in 3D on a 2D screen is quite challenging. Games like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, name any 2D fighting game, do not lock on. You have to judge the distance and time your attacks right. Timing and positioning are the main focus of such games. The fact that this game has this type of combat shows that it was not made from the ground up for this type of gameplay. I have no proof of this, but I'm assuming the team behind this game had some sort of framework from the other games to base theirs on. A lot of the animations are also the same, so there's that. The more we advance through the game, the more you will see how broken the combat truly is. But for now, just keep in mind that combat was not the main focus of this game. It is during this first combat encounter that I notice how small the combo meter looks on screen. It looks like it's a scaling issue that is caused by it not adjusting to higher resolutions. Something you didn't have to worry about on the 3DS. There's also something else wrong with the combo meter, but at this moment I have not noticed it. We finish beating up these guys and try to follow Catwoman. We open a vent and... oh my god. To get into the vent you would normally have to crouch. In this game, however, you have to crouch and press A. The problem is that it does not register properly. We will encounter more of this nonsense throughout the game. This is just the first instance of it. We continue up the building and another mechanic is introduced, scanning the environment. But instead of the detective vision we are used to, where everything important gets highlighted, we get a circle that we can move around the screen until we find something interactable. To analyze it, you have to stay on it with your scanned circle. This is obviously to prevent just moving the circle around the whole screen to scan everything. For now, I actually like this change a lot. It makes the detective vision way more methodical. We fight our way through some more guys and now get introduced to the detective vision. But I thought we already did that? Well, yes, but actually no. There's the normal detective vision, which highlights important things and enemies, but it doesn't highlight certain important things. It would have been really neat if, in order to see the heat signature and vision cones from enemies, you would first have to scan them with the circle. That's not a unique concept, but would be something. We finally face Catwoman in the first boss fight. She's basically just another enemy, but the other boss fights will be more interesting. Not good, but interesting. Some story later, and Batman decides to break into the Blackgate prison. Aha, that's where the name is from. From this point onwards, the game can be played by completing the areas in different orders. What I will be showing in this video is the path I chose for my first time through to show you how someone completely new to this game could interact with it. We enter the prison and we get the first instance of crawling through the floor grates, which is very interesting. So interesting, in fact, that I will show you the whole 15 seconds of it. Arkham Knight definitely overcompensates with its extremely quick movement, but this is also not the best solution. How about just making the distances shorter or increasing the movement speed by like 50%? Here we see a good example of how combat is too easy. You can interrupt a counter with another counter. There is nothing stopping me from just spamming the counter button and doing ridiculous things like this. Batman shows off his hacking skills with the crypto sequencer, and I actually really like this. It's completely different. You have to match the numbers, and I honestly think this minigame is better than the move the stick until it's at the right spot from the other games. Granted, it doesn't look as good, but it's more fun. Next, we have some spikes on the floor. Again, the clunkiness of the game makes this small obstacle just annoying. To avoid damage, you have to roll over the spikes. The problem is that you can only roll if you're already moving at a certain speed. So, if you are careful around the spikes, you're too slow to initiate the roll. But if you're too fast, you just step on them. They don't do much damage, but are annoying nonetheless. We stealth our way through some enemies and enter a room that introduces a new type of enemy, the knife guy. These guys suck. But at the moment there's only one, and we can manage that. His attacks are uncounterable, and the dodge is not really viable since, remember, you have to be moving in the direction of the dodge at a certain speed. So going backwards to avoid attacks is off the table. To beat this guy, you have to stun him with the cape and then beat him up. This will be relevant later. Another thing that at this moment doesn't seem so bad, but later on will become really annoying, is the breakable wall. Do you see it? Here is what a breakable wall in the other games would look like. This first wall is quite obvious, but the walls later on will tear down your patience. Something that is also introduced with this wall is the Metroidvania-esque playstyle of the game. We can't go through this wall because we haven't unlocked the gel launcher yet. But don't worry, it's in the next room. We acquire the gel launcher as our first upgrade. To get out of this room, you have to use the new gadget. Typical Metroidvania stuff. So far, so good. We break through the floor and land in the area for the next boss fight. This time against Solomon Grundy. This boss fight is a bit of a puzzle. You have to destroy the right fuse boxes to electrify the wires in order to damage Grundy. Okay, so this wire hangs down and... wait, what? Skip over like 5 minutes of me trying to figure out what to do. It turns out I didn't scan a sewer drain on the floor. It is one of those things that you can't see with the normal bat vision, only with the circle scanner. Now I admit, I was kinda tunnel visioning on the electric wires and neglected to scan the floor. However, the solution to your confusion, being something scannable that you missed, will reoccur throughout the game. The scanning mechanic, which I praised for being more methodical, becomes in such big maps, with lots of areas, really tedious. This slow scanning would work great for example, crime scenes, like in the other games. But using it as the basis for a lot of progression kind of disrespects the player's time. Okay, here's a wall that is clearly breakable, but I can't put explosive gel on it. Why? Because I need to scan it first. Unless you scan something, you can't lock onto it. I understand that locking onto everything before having scanned it might remove a bit of the puzzle, but you could just have interactions that don't need a lock on. But that would require a complete redesign of the mechanics, which I think would have been better, but oh well. This design forces you to stop, wait for the scan, and then continue, even if you know what you have to do. I honestly don't see the point of doing it this way, except for stretching out the runtime of this game. Some more combat, and look at that! I don't know why they added the bodies phasing through the floor to disappear and not just fade them out, but at least it's funny. The combat is as boring as ever, but you know what? Maybe I'm ruining my combos by spamming the counter button. Do you remember when I said there is something else wrong with the combo meter? Well, the combo meter is completely useless. You might say, well, they were always pretty useless. You don't have to get high combos to play the game. And that is true. But you are encouraged to get high combos. Look at Arkham City. Getting a higher combo allows me to enter free flow mode, which makes my attacks way more powerful. I also get some finisher options, and after the fight I get rewarded in XP for keeping up a high combo. XP which I can use to level up. And even if everything is fully upgraded, you still get an honorary level number. The game basically tells you, well done, you played like a real Batman. This game, however, just shows a number. It doesn't even give you XP based on the combos you had during the fight. It's not much different than a friend next to me telling me, by the way, you didn't get hit for like 13 attacks. Thanks, I guess? Something I haven't talked about yet is the map. I really think that choosing this 2.5D style was not a good idea. Because areas can overlap in 3D, the map has overlapping sections that make it hard to translate where you are exactly in the game world and where you are supposed to go. The game world is structured in 3D, but the map is only in 2D. The funny thing is, this was already solved in the 3DS version. I don't know why they changed it into a less readable, more complicated view. A stealth section later and another vent appears. I sincerely hope that whoever made those vents stubs their toe. The prompt even disappeared. Imagine you see the mysterious Batman about to go through a vent to deliver justice, but instead of going into the vent, he just looks at it as if the vent was the one that killed his parents. I search around for a bit, following these particles, and find another breakable wall that is indistinguishable from the ones around it. At least the particles give you a hint of where to look. This next set piece would be cool, but again it's hindered by how it is executed. We can't lock onto the enemy or scan anything because of the light, so we throw a batarang to destroy the light. But now the enemy just dodges all the attacks. The solution to this puzzle, I guess, is to destroy the light, scan the platform, put explosive gel onto it and make the enemy fall. You have to do it this way. For the next enemy, you have to destroy the lamp above him. This one-solution approach to situations is boring at best and frustrating at worst. It would be so much cooler if we could do multiple things to interact with set pieces and enemies. Think Hitman, where objects in the world react to you and another. You just have to figure out how to leverage the given mechanics to your advantage. But there's no right or wrong solution. Just as an example, in this Hitman mission, I knock out this guy, climb over the wall, knock out this guy, disguise myself as one of the enemies, poison the drink with a poisonous flower I picked up earlier, wait way too long for my target to drink the poisoned water, follow the target to the toilet and drown her in it. All of those separate steps are mechanics that don't force one specific way to play. I could have used rat poison or even lethal poison instead of the flower. I could have done so many different things because I was given a lot of tools that can come together for unique solutions to the puzzle of how to kill your targets. This encourages creativity and makes multiple playthroughs more fun. If you could interact with the world in more freeform ways, each encounter would become something you could look forward to, because you could try different ways to deal with the enemies. Games like Hitman, Prey, Deus Ex, they do this masterfully. But you don't have to go as far as these games do to create fun mechanics to play around with. Another room with the solution being a breakable wall you have to find. We get up here and again we have to scan for a breakable wall. We acquire a new crypto key which allows us to hack more advanced security panels. With these green ones, some of the numbers change, which, of course, makes the minigame more difficult. This is pretty good. Slowly introducing more mechanics to increase the challenge is a great way to prevent it from becoming boring. I must say I did not expect the best part about this game to be the hacking minigame, but here we are. We now backtrack to access one of those new panels. We use the elevator and get introduced to another new enemy. This one can't be stunned with the cape. Instead, you have to flip over him. Again, isolated from the others, this doesn't seem too bad, but keep in mind that this is again an enemy which you can't counter or dodge away from. A few more hacking minigames and we find an electrified floor. Something that now becomes really annoying is the ability of enemies to body block you. Because the dodge turns into a flip when in front of an enemy, it becomes impossible to dodge when enemies are on both sides. Unless it doesn't work and instead of flipping over, like I intended, Batman just decides to roll. I swear to Slanesh, this game just does the opposite of what I intend to do. Another vent and another breakable wall you have to scan first. You know what? I'm starting to see a pattern. I'll spare you some more of the same. For the first time I discover a clue. They are kind of like collectibles. They are optional things you can find and scan. Nothing wrong with that, but again, could be better. Instead of just saying, this is a clue, how about each clue telling a bit of a story that you can piece together as you find more? Each clue just states what it is, but how neat would it be if you could solve the crime with the information of multiple clues? You know, like a puzzle that requires you to think and not just scan every wall. I leave the facility and enter the next one. Okay, listen to this.
Bad timing.
I want you to guess which DC villain you think this is supposed to be. I'll give you 3 seconds. It's the Joker.
Check it out!
It doesn't sound like him at all, and I don't want to blame the voice actor, because Troy Baker definitely has it in him.
Oh, and we were having so much fun too!
But in this game, he's just underwhelming. Maybe you only got one take for each line. The Joker voice is tricky to get right, especially if you're trying to live up to Mark Hamill's voice.
Yo, Frankie, how's the wife and kids? You miss me?
Shut it, clown!
In this game, it sounds less like Joker and more like John. The Joker uses poison gas to trap Batman. I gotta say, this is a pretty underwhelming implementation of poison gas. We have this bar that fills up, and once it is full, we slowly take damage. It's like drowning in Minecraft. It's basically just a timer. It would be cool if it instantly started to damage you and you had to quickly equip a gas mask, which maybe could limit your vision. You know, just throwing ideas out there. Another fight follows, which would be boring, but this time there are multiple enemies in addition to the knife guys. Because you can't dodge, block or counter the knife attacks and you get body blocked by the other enemies, you will get hit. This does not make the fights more challenging, it just forces you to get hit in a frustrating way. If enemies had really powerful attacks, but telegraphed them so you had a chance to avoid it, that would be great. That is kind of what the normal enemies do, but because you can spam the counter, there is no challenge in avoiding these attacks. So we have attacks that are so easy to avoid that it's not fun, and we have attacks that are so impossible to avoid that it's not fun. Back to crawling through vents. You have to fall down here and crawl through the bottom vent. The perspective, however, is not helping. Level design should guide the player with visual cues and through the geometry of the map itself. But in this game, you have a perspective that occludes where you have to go. Things like this might not seem like a big deal, but if every aspect has issues, the experience as a whole suffers greatly. I haven't really talked about stealth, but that is because there's not much to talk about. Take out enemies from behind or use predetermined objects to lure or kill them. That is really basic in terms of stealth mechanics, and most of the time it is even quicker to just fight through the enemies. Here's a comparison. And while you can get lucky with the cycles and maybe go through stealth sections a bit quicker, it is not guaranteed, whereas combat, given how easy it is guaranteed to get you through a section at a reasonable pace. I suppose that stealth, like combat, is not the focus of this game. We rescue some prison guards and the Joker fills the room with gas. Again, just a timer for you to get out. A very generous timer, by the way. Look at how little the bar got filled. Also, remember that a full bar is not an instant death. Not much pressure here. Honestly, if you had the Sonic drowning music, I would stress out significantly more. You know what? Add that to the gas mask and we might have something worthwhile. We crawl through yet another vent and, ouch, get hit by electricity. Normally you would introduce mechanics like that in a way that can't make the player take forced damage. Because it is at the start of the vent and not triggered by a position but rather on a timer, the player can get unlucky and only see the electricity if it is too late. Also, look at this hitbox. I don't think this was intentionally done in a way to force getting damaged, but rather through incompetence. At least it builds on the concept by mixing in the poison mechanic later on, which for this section was way closer to actually damaging me. We finally get a new gadget, the line launcher. We now have a way to get over pits and can even knock down enemies in our path. Unfortunately, the line launcher is limited to certain predetermined points. Like the gel launcher, this reduces creativity in how you can use your tools to your advantage. Another 5 minutes of me looking for the way forwards until I realized the reason I missed it was because the damn prompt didn't show up again. I decide to check out one of the other zones. I'm greeted with a cutscene that transitions into a boss fight against Deadshot. This fight is actually pretty creative. We can only see from Deadshot's perspective and have to hide from his shots. Unfortunately, the fight gets interrupted by the regular combat. Deadshot shoots at us some more and gets blinded by a searchlight, which he shoots to move it away. This is a neat and subtle, yet clear enough way to signal to the player what they have to do. We wait for Deadshot to run out of bullets, move the searchlight with a batarang and use the line launcher to knock him out. This is a good mix of the previous mechanics. So far, this boss fight is definitely the best. We'll see how it holds up against the rest. We find the warden's office and are set on the mission to disarm all these bombs. After some more of the same, we get another boss fight, if I can call it that. It's a room where you play memory, but bombs drop if you guess wrong. Naturally, I'm unlucky and die. Restart later and I can't lock onto the targets anymore. I try for a bit and consider that the game might have bugged out, but no. What do you think is the solution? Well, because I died, I need to rescan the targets again before I can lock on. Also, you can't move the stick to switch between targets. You have to completely let go of the stick before you can select something again. A bit annoying, but not a big deal. We get the shock batarang and are taught how to open doors with electricity. We move on to disarm some of the bombs. Another instance of perspective getting in the way of guiding the player through the level. Also, I find it hilarious that the camera moves to this panel as if I didn't see it. Just for reference, the other ones didn't have this camera pan. That was the last bomb. We can finally make our way back to the warden. I want to show you real quick how a typical backtrack looks like in this game, so please bear with me for a moment. I'm even going to play it at 200% speed to not bore you too much. As you can see, it is just moving through empty areas while trying not to get lost. This is how a lot of the non-combat gameplay looks like. Here's another clip of how the game plays after you have defeated the enemies. Of course, backtracking and trying to find the right way is completely normal in Metroidvanias. However, I don't remember other games feeling this boring or tedious, so why not just take a look at how some other games handle moving through the level? I think the biggest issue this game has in this regard is the lack of interesting movement. Sure, a grapple gun and the line launcher sound cool, but they only work at predetermined spots. New enemies do spawn in previously visited areas after some progression points, but in between those events, the areas stay empty. Putting mechanics that in the previous games worked great in a Metroidvania style game really takes away from both aspects. It is not a great Metroidvania because of the aforementioned issues. It is also not a great Arkham game because it is so limited in what it can do. But putting that aside for now, let's just continue. Maybe it will get better. I haven't mentioned it so far, but sometimes you can find upgrades or suit pieces on a side path. You don't get the full upgrades or suit until you find all of them. I just wish they would be a bit more creative than just a text box. Something like in God of War with a simple graphic that looks different for each collected thing and that shows visually how much progress you have made would make the upgrades feel more worthwhile. In this game I don't even bother reading the text boxes after the first few because they always say the same thing. I make my way back into the first zone and can finally break the first breakable wall I've seen. Or it's just another upgrade piece. Really disappointing, if you ask me. After some more searching through the level, I find another breakable floor. Yay! We make our way through the sewer system with a newly acquired line launcher. This right here is of course a nice setup to knock the enemies out with the line launcher, so I try it. Well, that didn't work out. I fight for a bit and... Excuse me? Sir, would you mind stepping from the third dimension to a place where I could reach you? I mean, this is one way of making a fight harder, just make it impossible to even touch the enemy ever. How does this even happen? I'm again faulting their underwhelming implementation of the 2.5D style for this. A restart later and the same thing happens again. At this point I'm starting to think that maybe I'm missing something, but no, another restart and the problem is fixed. I can only imagine how frustrating that would have been for a kid playing this on the 3DS. If they didn't realize this was a bug, they might have backtracked again through the whole level, only to come back later and encounter the same thing again. Disregarding the hypothetical child, let's continue. Interestingly enough, a breakable wall is actually highlighted in the normal bat vision. I don't know why, and I'm thankful for that, but it doesn't seem all too consistent. The next puzzle requires you to break 2 panels with the gel launcher and then throw shock batarangs into it. At this point, I realize how similar the puzzles actually are in terms of mechanics. Sure, thematically, the gel launcher blows things up, but mechanically, you lock onto something, press the button, and something in the level happens. Because the gel launcher only works at certain spots, it is no different from throwing a batarang on a button to open a door. I have previously compared this game to Hitman, but you don't even have to go outside the Arkham franchise. The other games have pre-selected breakable walls, sure, but if, where and how you break them is up to you. Additionally, you can use the gel and batarangs in combat, which I guess is possible in Blackgate, but I would not recommend it as it is not really a viable option to defeat the enemies. Going back, I get access to a line launcher upgrade. It is now possible for me to walk on the rope. That is really disappointing. Yes, I need that to progress, but it's not really an exciting upgrade, is it? The next cutscene leads us into another boss fight. In this fight, we need to use the line launcher to damage the Joker. There are multiple, I guess you could call them phases. The first is just using the line launcher as normal. For the second one, he dodges, but I can't use the batarang to damage him either, since he just blocks them. And you can't run up to him, since he just runs away. If he's not doing those things, he's shooting at us. I manage to dodge the bullets and get close to him while he is reloading. I beat him up and get him into the next phase. I get close, okay, that's not the way to do it. I guess this phase does not allow for close combat. I try again and what? I now can't get close to him. I try yet again and manage to finally punch him. What you're supposed to do is wait for him to reload and then use the line launcher. For the next phase, he turns on his stun baton, which you need to disable with a shock batarang, only to then use the line launcher again. I see what they were going for. Each phase adds difficulty by testing your skills with the established tools. That sounds great, but the mechanics are, as previously discussed, quite underwhelming. This is also not a particularly unique or challenging implementation of those mechanics. For the final phase, the Joker uses gas, which adds urgency to the already tense battle that builds on itself. I think that sort of thought is what they were going for, but but in reality, it is just standing around using the gadgets in the right order: dodge, batarang, line launcher. The gas does not really add anything, since it does nothing until the bar is full. There are also bombs, but they are so easily avoided it's not really worth mentioning. More story, and we get a crypto key that allows us to use new terminals. It has a new color and a timer, which at this point is one of the more exciting things about this game. This hacking minigame does pretty much exactly what the Joker fight tried to be. For example, the basic gameplay of finding the numbers gets more difficult by simply having some numbers change. This last one adds a timer, which pressures you to move quickly. But what is the difference between this and the poison gas? For one, this timer is way quicker, and because you don't have health and instead get reset, it is way more threatening. Lastly, you don't have to wait for something else to happen before you can act. Your progress is entirely based on how quickly you can search and find the given numbers. I enter a new area in search of the penguin. Vents, walking grapple hook, oh, a stealth section. More fighting, which is basically button mashing. Here you can see how I was committed to a punch, but was able to cancel into a parry. Being able to cancel attacks into other actions can be an interesting part of a game. For that to work, however, a game needs to have significantly more actions, not just one attack button. A wall that isn't breakable? Instead, you have to break this rope in the foreground, which then allows us to jump over this gap. This next room is typical ability gating. You enter one way, but can only leave with the new ability. It's just really uninspired to have something just fall over the entrance. As you can see, I am now able to open vents from a distance. To get out, I have to walk through this whole vent around the room. Why couldn't it simply make the thing blocking me from going out something I can pull? Would have been a more elegant solution, but then again, just getting into a room and then immediately leaving the same way might save a bit of the player's time. Can't have that. Also, this gadget doesn't really do anything new. If you look at how the game plays with the bat claw, you can see that it just stops you for a moment to make you pull something. It is like the explosive gel in that regard. If these gadgets actually changed how you play the game, they could be way more fun. This is just a pale imitation of a Metroidvania by just having doors, or in this case walls, which gate the player by just not having the right key available. Instead of challenging the player with more complex interactions and movement, we just get a new animation for clearing an obstacle. I've shown it previously, but in Carry On, for example, one of the abilities you get is the possession of a corpse. Of course, it can be used to pull on a lever to open a door, but for the time of the possession, how you interact with the world completely changes. You can't freely move like before, and you need to use ladders. You also have a gun. Wanna hear something surprising? The game was directed by Mark Pacini, who, according to his IMDb, also directed Metroid Prime 1, 2 and 3. How this game ended up the way it did is puzzling to me. If we take a look at the developer's website, we see this tagline: "Your enemies will define you." This sounds so much more interesting. Imagine, if you will, a game where the gameplay mechanics change based on the enemies you face. Maybe you even lose abilities as the game progresses and gain different ones, completely changing how you interact with the game world. Instead of putting explosive gel on the floor, I pull down this wooden beam. Another wall, and we get to the next cutscene that leads into yet another boss fight. This guy jumps a lot, and you have to roll away at the right moment. It is nicely telegraphed, and a successful dodge allows us to punish the enemy with a cape stun. This fight is actually quite refreshing. Because there's only one enemy, the problems the combat previously had are mostly not present. It is nothing special, but there's also no glaring problem with it. A cutscene later, and we are chasing the penguin based on the blood trails he left behind. For something like this, the detective vision is actually quite alright. Following a trail of something makes you pay attention to a specific path you need to follow, instead of scanning every wall, ceiling and floor in the hopes of finding something to interact with. We still get some of the awful combat though. I try to take this guy out stealthily, but his buddy gets alarmed and shoots at me. This is a good point to talk about the gun type enemies. The guns were always annoying in the Arkham games, and they are, of course, supposed to be. The point of the guns is to discourage using normal combat tactics for every encounter. You could use a smoke pellet to escape and then take the armed guards out with stealth. You could disable the guns before entering combat, you could yank them out of the enemy's hands or shock them to make them shoot uncontrollably. While being annoying, they forced you to play more creatively. Blackgate does this by sometimes having environmental elements that immediately take them out, which is only really one way to deal with them aside from direct combat. Remove any environment traps and the options like smoke, and you're left with only annoying combat. We get, again, trapped in a room that fills with poison gas, but this time leaving the room is a bit more difficult because of the damn prompt! Okay, this is getting a bit ridiculous. We at last enter the final section of the prison, the lighthouse. This area is definitely the best, mostly because it is the most linear and thus does not suffer from some of the issues. It is not really a good sign when the best area in a Metroidvania is the most linear. To reach the lighthouse, we have to get up while avoiding enemies. Enemies need to be taken out with scripted environment sequences. A noteworthy obstacle is this hatch, which opens upwards, which means you can't pull on it. Instead, you need to throw a batarang at it to open it. This is a neat twist on an obstacle by simply changing which way it is facing. This gets slightly expanded on with the next hatch, which doesn't open when being hit. The noise instead makes an enemy go towards the hatch to investigate and open it. This would be kind of cool if it wasn't a forced set piece. I don't know if this was specifically scripted to work like this, or if the enemy AI genuinely works like this, but regardless, you can't do that anywhere else as far as I'm aware. Back in the previous section, I am immediately faced with a new boss fight against the Penguin. This fight is extremely annoying. There are these two guys with machine guns which kill you pretty much instantly if you are close to them. The trick to this fight is to lure them away separately with batarangs and then disable their gun by pulling off their backpack. You need to constantly back away so as to not get into their sights, lest you perish. Also note that both of them walk to the same spot, just slightly apart. Because of that, I got shot by the second one while disabling the first one. I've tried to lure them away to each side of the map, but they just walked back to the start before I could disable them. Somehow I managed to get one guy to the top while the other one goes to the start and I can finally get rid of the machine guns. This leaves the Penguin unguarded and oh my god, there are multiple phases. Now there are also freaking drones? Surprisingly, I managed to get past the second phase and of course there's a third one. I die thinking that I really don't want to repeat the fight, and apparently the developers thought the same thing, since this is, from my testing, the only boss fight aside from the final one that saves your progress. You can't believe how relieved I was seeing that health bar. If this fight didn't save the progress, that would have been the one bad day needed to turn me insane. I finally beat this damn boss fight and can finally leave. Okay, I just want to show you this little fight here. There is so much going wrong in just a few seconds. This guy needs to be stunned and then you can flip over him to beat him from behind. I get the cinematic camera for the last hit, but he is still standing and hits me while I'm unable to move. I then flip over him, but he just straight up phases through me. I think it's fair to say that there are issues. The sad thing is that this is one of the more enjoyable fights precisely because something is going wrong. Combat as intended is just so mind-numbingly repetitive. By the way, I found the section that just loops back in on itself. There's no collectible or destructible wall here as far as I can tell. If someone knows what the purpose of this area is, please tell me, because I refuse to believe that this is just an empty section. After looking around for way too long, I finally find the one thing that lets me progress. This pipe that you need to blow up opens up the next section. This last section, or first or second, depending on your playthrough order, is, with its according gadget, definitely the best. Its design style is distinctly different from the rest of the game, which makes me think that there were multiple teams that worked separately on each section. But it's still gonna suck, don't worry. I've talked about how fighting is quicker than stealth, but as you can see, it is faster to stealth this one guy than to fight him. However, I consider just walking up to one guy and pressing a button a pretty poor execution of stealth. We get an introduction to a timing puzzle, a theme which this section will explore in ways. I also love this little microcosm of the game. I blow up a wall, fall into a fight, and then continue by crawling through a vent. That is basically the game summarized. Something that this section tests you on is gliding. For example, gliding and then grappling while in the air. This one part specifically feels so weird and out of place because you actually have to time your grapple and glide somewhat well. This comes back to the lack of fun movement options I mentioned earlier. It's not like this game has no movement mechanics that could be fun, but the vast majority of the time you just stand and grapple to a higher ledge. This next bit is also noticeably different because of its zoomed out, more typical 2D camera. For this one bit in the whole game, you have to glide through multiple obstacles. There is something there. Why wasn't this expanded on? It has its problems, like being able to just tank the damage, but it could have been more than this one challenge, too, if you count this introduction to it. I break another wall, shocker, I know, and we face another boss/puzzle. In terms of puzzles, this is probably one of the better ones. These rotating cylinders need to be aligned, but every cylinder moves all the ones below it, and you only have 4 moves before it resets. Solving this puzzle gets us the last upgrade, the glue gel. From the selection of gadgets we have in this game, this is what I consider to be the best executed. Instead of blowing up a wall, it prevents a door from closing, or in this case, clogging a pipe. So it is kind of an inverse of the explosive gel with the same effect. As you can tell, it's not mechanically superior, instead it is interesting because it is later on used in more clever ways. We will get to that in a second though. First, more combat. I am confronted with a door which opens when I use the gel, but it closes after a short time. This teaches you to put the gel on the desired location and use it when you are in the right position, in this case in front of the door. This next boss fight is against Black Mask. The first part is of course more combat, during which I realized that you can freeze enemies in place for a short time with the new gel. But the time it takes to use it and being vulnerable while doing so makes this a pretty useless ability. If the enemies stayed frozen until you hit them, it could be worth it in some scenarios, but similar to stealth, you're better off just punching your way through the enemies. Speaking of which, there are so many! Ah, the stock sound popularized by CinemaSins. Anyways, Black Mask just kind of leaves, so we need to go after him, but first there's a new puzzle to solve. I need to turn off this electrical wall to go through. We get introduced to these Black Mask panels, which are on a timer, like the door that showed us how to use the gel previously. This first one turns off the laser grid and part of the electricity. The idea here is of course to place it and go where you need to go before activating it. This allows us to access the second panel, which, again, allows us to go somewhere else, while also disabling part of the electricity. This brings us to the last panel, which does not bring us anywhere new, but instead loops back to the first panel. All of these panels need to be activated at the same time. The trick is, of course, to activate the panel once with the gel, and then again, but put gel on it before you leave without activating it. Because this was impossible with the first one, since I need to be close to the laser grid before activating it, this last panel looping back allows us to access the first one and activate all 3 at the same time. I think this particular puzzle is the best of the whole game. It taught us a mechanic before the boss fight and expanded on it in a clever way that has a somewhat elegant solution. And while there's only one solution, it is entirely based on the existing game mechanics being used in a logical way, similar to what I talked about earlier with the Hitman games. That being said, the next part completely ruins this boss fight by doing pretty much the exact opposite. It again feels like these parts were designed by different people. Alright, I jump down and holy hand grenade. This guy deals some serious damage. Because I can't go anywhere else, I attempt to glide and... alright. You are not supposed to step into the lights, because he can't see us standing to the left of it? This is what I mean by being the opposite of the previous puzzle. Light and dark is not an established game mechanic like in Thief, and when you throw something new at the player, make sure to make it easy to read. How could I know that he would kill me if I stepped into the light without doing so first? I could have guessed, but that's not even the solution to the puzzle. It is a requisite for being able to solve it. If the camera focused on the light, that would have been better, but ideally you should utilize something the player is familiar with and maybe add a twist to that. There is a puzzle-focused game that does this wonderfully. I do what the game has taught me and scan the lamp. The text reads, "The light can be shattered with a thrown object." Okay, great. Batarang it is. What? I broke the light, didn't I? Game, what do you want from me? I'm over here trying my best and this game just says, "Nuh-uh." There are these alarms on the side that can distract enemies. So I distract Black Mask and try to get to the tunnel in the floor while he's busy shooting the alarm. I die again. So I guess destroy the light while he is distracted. I crawl through the floor. I can't really do anything, so I guess I'm gonna try to break the other lamp. You can't? Instead, I need to leave on the right side and activate the alarm on the left. You might think, maybe I'm close enough now to take him out from behind, but no. You need to wait for him to leave where he is standing and crawl in the tunnel under him. You aren't close enough to him to take him out, so you need to go to the left, activate the alarm on the right, go back into the tunnel and wait until he is above you. This allows us to turn on the electricity for the Arkham Wing, which is truly the last area. This last area is more like a room, it's not a full section, but you know what a new area means. Backtracking through the levels, woo! The goal of the Arkham Wing is to open this door. The obstacles in this room test the previous mechanics. Blow up the floor, use the line launcher upgrade, hit these things with the electric batarang, and look at this. This is what I was talking about with showing the danger before letting you encounter it. I have plenty of time to see that there's electricity that activates on a regular timer. This should have been the first encounter, not the last. Next, we need to time the gel with this thing in the wall, pull this vent cover with the bat claw, play the hacking minigame, and finally the door can be opened. This whole section was the final one. A test of all previously learned skills, and what you just saw was it. That was basically what the game was building up to. Disappointment would suggest I had expectations to begin with, but honestly, the fact that it was so lame and not broken was a pleasant surprise. To be fair, there is still something left to do. We need to disarm bombs. Interestingly enough, this changes based on which boss was the last one you fought. Since I fought Black Mask as the last boss, I need to disable bombs with the timed gel mechanic, but more on the other two versions in the conclusion. As I try to leave, I see this guy hanging around with a note from Catwoman attached to him. This gives me the first objective marker to find the bombs. They spawned at a location in the normal map, so nothing new to explore here, just the old walking and fighting. I finally reach the bomb, and to disarm it, I need to find 3 of these control panels and put gel onto them within the given time limit. The panels of the first bomb are annoyingly quite spread apart. I finally reach the last one and oh god, 1 out of 5? There are 4 more? It's moments like these that make me question my sanity. At least the disarmed bomb gives me the location to the next one. If I had to go through the entire level to find it, I think I would cry. The next bombs are luckily much better. The area they are in are quite small compared to this first one, and the panels are quickly reached. Finally, the last bomb is disarmed. The only thing that's left is to fight Catwoman. This final boss fight, the last thing you do in this game, starts with normal combat. Pretty much exactly like the first time we fought Catwoman. Though, in addition, she has this jump attack Bronze Tiger used against us, and honestly, after all the fighting, a 1v1 is clearly the strength of the system. And because you have to dodge the jump attack, you can't spam your response, which is good, but it also telegraphs pretty well when it will happen. In the second phase of the fight, we get hit with a flashbang, I think, and this trippy effect gets applied. Occasionally, Catwoman jumps out from the darkness and attacks us. You have to counter her attacks at the right moment. This is the only time in the game where you cannot spam the counter, and the timing is actually pretty tight. It took me several tries to get it right. The trick is not to look at the visual, but listen to the sound that plays as your timing indicator. In this third phase, she attacks us with this clone jutsu type attack, where she isn't real and you have to wait till the actual prompt shows up. The annoying bit is that you have to just kind of stand around until she attacks again, which doesn't feel great. It's just waiting till you get a chance without any agency in the meantime. And that's it. The fight is over. It wasn't great, but it really could have been worse. This kind of describes the game in a way. But before we come to the conclusion of what this game was, there are credits to talk about. After going through the whole game, I'm not gonna miss an opportunity to nitpick. But actually it's fine. It uses the style from the cutscenes for the first part, and we get an after credit scene for the Black Mask, and another one for the Suicide Squad after the second part. The second part of the credits also only starts from the top half, which I think is because they forgot to fix it when porting it from the two screens of the 3DS. I also find it pretty funny that the music stops way before any of the audio people get credited. Anyways, you have stuck around this far, which suggests to me that you like this style of video, so if you want to see more of them, consider subscribing and sharing this video with other game design enthusiasts. This game was something. A lot of the game was incredibly tedious, mostly because it decided to use this open map design. Such a design decision is not bad on its own, but not having fast travel options and few shortcuts to unlock, as well as having to go through the same areas over and over again, combined with the detailed scanning, which makes you pause every few steps to make sure you haven't missed anything, all of that make it what it is. The lack of movement mechanics to make exploring the map fun or challenging, and the big stretches of nothing to do except walk, don't help with the tedium. We have the cape, but it was only really used to its full effect in the one section. And like I said before, the grapple and line launcher only work with fixed points. The combat tried to mix things up, but its simplicity and, in parts, unfair moments really make you dread seeing a group of enemies. The occasional stealth sections were pretty bare bones, and because you have to scan the objects to, for example, distract an enemy, felt also tedious and drawn out, which led to me skipping over stealth and just punching my way through. Players will choose the most effective path, even if it is less fun. There are a few bugs, but nothing a restart couldn't fix. The game encourages you to play through it multiple times by choosing your own order to fight the main 3 bosses in. If you want to unlock all the costumes, you need to play the game 3 times. The costumes give you some buffs and are mainly there to make replaying it a bit easier. But even with them, the repetitiveness and tedious nature of the game does not disappear. The thing that changes when choosing a different boss to end on is the 5 things you have to do before the Catwoman fight. You saw the bombs from Black Mask with their timed gel panel challenges. For the sake of context, the Penguin has you rescue these hostages and the Joker makes you disarm these present bombs. The best parts were the hacking minigame, the Deadshot boss and the last Catwoman fight. The hacking minigame kind of outstayed its welcome, which could have been extended if it maybe threw in some more twists. And the 2 boss fights had some problems of their own. The section which I praised for being the best is still not something I would consider worthwhile, and it stands on top only through technicality. The mechanics were underwhelming and not even explored to their limits in interesting ways. Sticking to a lot of the design concepts from the other Arkham games really hurt the execution. But even if the whole Batman theme was stripped from the game, it wouldn't really have much of an identity of its own. The repetitive puzzle design of scanning until you find something to interact with and then interacting with it could have been improved by exploring ways to mix and test the mechanics. The level design had to work around the fact that the order of the abilities is not predetermined, which led to the Arkham Wing being really the only part where multiple gadgets were somewhat combined. The lack of focus on what this game should be becomes clear when looking at all the options you have. Combat, stealth, puzzles, boss fights, exploration and different playthrough combinations. None of these things were given the time and effort to make it special. Instead, we got this game. If you want to make your own game, here's what you can take away from this one. Number 1. Respect the player's time and make things faster if there's no good reason not to. Number 2. Build on what you have by exploring all the ways it can be used and mixed with other things. Number 3. Each mechanic in your game should have a distinct use and purpose. Number 4. Have a clear focus. It's better to have a few amazing things rather than a lot of bad or mediocre ones. The highs are defined by the lows, and this game makes me appreciate how good other games can be. Still, I want to reiterate that my assessment of the quality of this game is by no means intended to lessen your enjoyment of it. Recognizing the bad should never prevent you from enjoying anything. With that said, I hope you could learn something and at the very least had fun watching. I thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.